My name's Mark Taylor, and actually I'm from Level 3 Communications, and I'm pretty interested to hear what these guys have to say, because part of my responsibilities there is to manage the CDN product from Level 3, and we're pretty interested in transparent caching, so perfect topic for me. Before we start, Dan asked me to remind you that there's Wi-Fi here, free Wi-Fi. It's the one called Info Today, and if you need to connect, the password is also Info Today. So let's start off by asking these guys to introduce themselves briefly, who they are, where they're from, and what they do. Start with you.
Hi, my name is Gilad Pereg. I'm from Oversea. We're a transparent caching company. I'm originally from Israel, and welcome, and I hope you enjoy this session.
Good morning. My name is Alan Orlovich. I'm CTO of PRAP, also a company that is providing transparent caching solutions, and I'm based out of Boston.
Hi, my name is Anshu Agarwal, and I am from Juniper Networks. I run the product management for content and media solutions for Juniper.
Hello, my name is Hashim Ibrahimi. I'm the co-founder and vice president of engineering at Super Lumen Networks, and we do transparent caching plus some security-related stuff when it comes to proxy solutions in general.
Thanks, folks. So I thought it would be useful just to start off with a very brief overview from each of the folks here about, from their perspective, what the transparent caching architecture is that they deploy in terms of where it goes, how traffic gets to it, and a sense of the size and scale that would be needed for some sort of ISP implementation. So let's start with Gilad.
So really, we see two different types of architectures in the transparent caching market. There's what you would call an inline architecture and out-of-band architecture. We're using an out-of-band architecture, which really what it looks like, it's you take apart the caching into two separate entities. One is a control entity, one is a serving entity. It's a bit similar to how a CDN would be structured. There are many different advantages to that. What we see from the operators, the large operators, that they're very interested in scalability and ease of deployment. You get both of those with this kind of architecture. If you're looking at networks that we've deployed networks of dozens and over 100 gigabit per second of net cache out. I'm emphasizing net cache out because it's important to look at what the real value that the caching system is contributing or generating into the network. So it's 100 gigabit that have been generated by the cache. These 100 gigabits serve both to improve the quality of experience of the end users and, of course, to reduce the cost of delivery to the operator.
I'll take a bit different view on the question what architecture is. I want to talk about the network architecture. So if you look at how our customers are deploying transparent cache, I think if you look at the larger customers, Tier 1 operators, their interest is primarily around deploying transparent cache at the subscriber edge. So transparent cache is used to optimize the network for cost and quality. And the best position to do that in larger network would be at subscriber edge, where transparent cache can broadly optimize the network for cost, offload the parts of the network that are north of the cache. So it would be a backbone and peering in transit and larger network. And also the best position to minimize latency. By positioning the content closer to subscribers, transparent cache can really help operators to optimize the network for cost and quality. The way that our solution deploys, it's in-band. So our solution stands transparently between network, between content source and the end user. And what we do, we broadly cache multiple services, so allowing operator to do that across a spectrum of classes and of traffic and applications, and identify what's popular in the way that doesn't create a cost for the operator. So caching helps and is not a burden in itself.
Yeah, so the way we are deploying solutions is very similar. We are at the subscriber edge location in the broadband ISP, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3. The scale is different in all of these networks. It can be from dozens of gigabits per second to hundreds of gigabits per second. And the way we are deployed is we are basically sit behind the access router. So it could be our own universal edge router or other edge router. And it transparently caches traffic on both ends. So it's transparent on both ends, which is to the client as well as to the origin. And where we see it actually offers the most benefit is not only on the bandwidth savings, but it also improves the significant subscriber experience. And we've seen that both in wireline and mobile operators.
Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of the different approach. At Super Lumen, we put a lot of emphasis on scalability and want to make sure that when the solution is deployed, it can very easily be scaled. And we have a concept called coordinated cache array that very easily, as soon as you notice that you need more capacity based on either fault tolerance or scalability, you could add additional servers and increase the capacity that is provided with our coordinated cache array farms. And then beyond that, we are a true 64-bit solution, and we run on the standard hardware, and it's mainly deployed, just like the other panelists were saying, at the edge. But the goal that we have is to bring the content as close as possible to the consumer. We have proxy solutions that are actually brought to the local network of the consumers, and we've seen a lot of benefits with having that because the performance that you get at the local network is obviously by far better than anything else on the wide area network. Just like everybody else, we do have the inline implementation that is available, but you can also take advantage of routers that are WCCP capable or L4 switches, and that's how you could route the traffic to our transparent cache and take advantage of the caching available by us.
So, Anshu, Juniper's a pretty big brand name, and there have been some concerns around, certainly in the US, I think, around the legality of doing transparent caching. So, has Juniper acquired the technology to do that? How do you feel about that, or how does Juniper feel about that, and how do you answer that concern to potential customers?
So absolutely. This concern comes up in every single deployment within U.S. Outside U.S., the concerns are not that significant. But the way Juniper handles is Juniper solutions are compliant. So in the case of transparent caching, there's something called DMCA, which is Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and our solution is DMCA compliant. But the service providers does have an option to override any of those. It's a policy-based system, so the service provider can set policies to override cache control headers. For instance, if the content provider marks non-cacheable, Juniper solution will not cache that content, but there are policies that can allow the service provider, whether they are in U.S. or outside U.S., to be able to. But to answer your question, Mark, we conform to the regulatory requirements, and we are DMCA compliant.
Okay. So Alan, just to dive into the question then around this, this panel's around several CDN operators have announced relationships with transparent caching companies. You're one of them, right? I think you did a deal with Edgecast. Yep. So why are CDN operators interested in this technology?
I think to understand that, I think we need to understand why the customers are asking them to do that, right? So, and then we can go and answer that quite confidently. So, what we see in the marketplace, right? Our customers, we have a sort of customer base of over 200 operators globally. So, our experience doing this over time, I think, if you look back at the history of kind of how transparent caching solutions fared in the market back in maybe 2008, 2009. Larger operators believe that operator CDN would be the better approach for them than transparent cache because operator CDN was seen as kind of holy grail, if you say, right? So you can have cache the content, you can optimize your network, and you can have revenue at the same time. And I think right now, in 2012, we can say that operator CDN did not succeed to optimize operators' network broadly. And as a result of that, I think we having this panel today, and I think we had the last year for the first time discussions about transparent caching, because the market started seeing transparent caching as a way to optimize the network right away. Because transparent caching, by the nature of it, allows operators to optimize the network for cost and quality without entering into relationship with every possible content provider on Earth. And that's the interest. But how operators, network operators approaching this, not just saying, well, operate a CDN, or any CDN initiative they have, let's set them aside, but really see transparent caching as an extension and part of the strategy. So whatever CDN deployments have been done until now, whatever vendors that operators are now looking at in various models, from licensed CDN, managed CDN, and all this stuff, operators are saying, okay, this is good, but there's all the over-the-top content that we need to support, and here transparent caching comes into the picture, but it doesn't come as a standalone solution. Nobody has the appetite for just another kind of silo that's separated. So as a result, we see the desire to converge, to have a common architecture where transparent caching and CDN will be harmonized together, will be deployed in conjunction, and some synergies will be derived from that. That's how we drive our strategy, and we does this deal with Edgecast and have other unannounced partners in the same to the same tone. The idea is to work with the CDN solutions out there, that you need to support them and interoperate with already exists, rather than coming with kind of end-to-end, single vendor, transparent caching CDN solution, but really work with the CDN activities and projects that have been out there for the last 4 or 5 years and complement them. And we're doing that, Edgecast and other partners, creating a common solution that operators can deploy and derive synergies out of that convergence. And that's, I think, of the interest.
So Hashem, do you see the same thing, or how does the network operator think about it that may be different to a CDN operator, or are they the same?
Well, I definitely agree. The transparent caching definitely provides the type of things that Alan was mentioning. Now, above and beyond that, operators understand that with that in place, they can save money. Bandwidth saving, quality of service, quality of experience are the type of things that you're getting with transparent caching. But above and beyond that, once you have customers that are happier with the service that you're providing, because the content is brought closer to the consumer. Now, a lot of deployments that you have things like Netflix, Move Networks, you notice that they have clients in place that are monitoring the bandwidth that's available to them. And based on that, decide what type of, what segment and what baud rate, bit rate they want to send that request the next segment of that video. When we've noticed that when the transparent caching is in place, because the content is closer to the consumer, because there's better bandwidth available closer to the consumer, these clients usually go for the higher bit rate of that next segment that's available. Now, with that, immediately the consumers are noticing a better quality of service. And so transparent caching definitely makes a lot of sense. Operators realize that they can provide a better service, and then they can save money because of the bandwidth savings that they have in place, and they will have happier users because of the service that they're providing.
Okay. So I'm going to ask all of you this. I'll start. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, just one more thing. What our customers are the operators, right? What they're doing with caching is obviously reducing the cost of delivery. That's clear. But what they're also doing, they're monetizing the QoE, the quality of experience, to the end users. And this is very, very important. So obviously they all want to reduce the cost, but at the end of the day, they're also measured about how much revenue they bring. We have customers which are adding caching capability to the different broadband packages that they provide. In this way, they're doing what we call, or what they call, service differentiation. Now, if you think about it, if you have groups of users which have different levels of service through the transparent caching system, now comes in a CDN offering you need to be able to balance the quality of experience between transparent caching and the CDN. So think of a content provider that sees his content being delivered through the CDN with a quality of experience that is equal or maybe less than another content provider who is being delivered through transparent caching. He's not so happy. So what operators can do, because they control their network, if they deploy a converged transparent caching and CDN system, they can manage the QoE, and we call it holistic QoE control, throughout the different contents and users that they have. This is one very, very important reason why they want to integrate or deploy a converged transparent caching and CDN solution.
Okay. So let's start with Anshu with this one. So what's needed to bring the two things together, right, in terms of a CDN and transparent caching? And does it matter? Is it different if it's a CDN service provider offering like Level 3 or Akamai, or a vendor of equipment like Juniper and Cisco?
So from a service provider perspective, the solution really needs to be converged. And the reason the solution needs to be converged is because the service provider wants to deploy it in the deep edge. First of all, in the deep edge, the real estate is not very much available. So you can't have a red box and a blue box and a green box. You can't have a variety of these things. So you have to have a converged system that allows transparent caching and reverse proxy caching, which offers the content delivery services. And the second thing is you need to be able to manage capacity. So, for instance, there's some flash news and some video has gone viral, which is demanding which is taking a lot of bandwidth. Then the service provider needs to be able to control the network to be able to transfer the capacity for transparent caching versus the reverse proxy caching. And the infrastructure that's kind of needed, and it's based on our experience with our service provider, that it needs to be a single solution that can be managed from the same system, and that capacity can be moved, or capacity automatically moves from one solution to another solution. And it serves all protocols, so the entire content delivery comes into picture then. If they were two separate solutions, they're just manageability stuff, and you can manage capacity.
Hashem, how do you feel about that?
Yes, I do agree. But then on the other hand, the reason we call this transparent caching is so it is transparent, and you can bring it into environments where the consumer is not aware that this is happening. A lot of deployments that we have, we go in and we do have all, as I said before, the other aspects of a proxy caching, which is what Anshu mentioned, like reverse proxy. We've noticed that there are deployments where the consumer is only interested in the content that is associated with them. Therefore, they want to accelerate that content, and then they frankly don't care about whatever else that people are accessing. So in that scenario, we do have a deployment that we offer. Now, beyond that, when everything is of interest, scalability becomes a huge issue. You got to be able to quickly go from one to multiple servers, and we have ISPs that tell us in the afternoon hours anywhere from 30 to 50% of their bandwidth is chewed up by nothing than Netflix. They're coming in. People are watching videos left and right, and then that puts a lot of pressure on their network with transparent caching in place, obviously. Since the content is cached, that issue is not as big of an issue anymore.
Okay. So, Alan, any other thoughts on the infrastructure implications of the convergence?
Yeah, and I would like to extend what Anshu was saying. I fully agree with that. I think the real estate at the edge is limited, and so convergence is one of the drivers for convergence is around that. What I'd like to add here is the fact is that as a result of that being the edge, so volume of traffic for silo CDN solutions, so if you look at just at Netflix traffic or just at Akamai traffic, or just at operator CDN like Edgecast traffic. At the network edge, typically is not high enough to justify a separate box. Not only that, a TCO burden, so you have to have blue box and red box and more boxes potentially, but also those boxes will be underutilized. So there's additional driver for convergence, that proper utilization of resources. But because of that underutilization, what we're seeing right now that operator CDN deployments or over-the-top CDN deployments, the way that managed CDN deployments are done in the network, they typically are more centralized because it's just not economical to go distribute it on something that you will look at 100 megabits of traffic next to BRAS. So that's why CDNs of all kinds are not utilizing the power of distributed deployment to the end because there's just not enough volume. If you have broad coverage of traffic, if you look at all the content traffic in the network, which can be, in mobile network can be up to 90% today. In fixed, we're normally seeing 80% of the traffic being content traffic. If you're able to look at all of that holistically, right, and that caching becomes economical at the edge. And we are able to tap those benefits of edge latency, of edge network offload. Imagine deliver 30% of your bits from the edge. And that sort of is, in fact, is enablement for CDNs to go to the edge. Those platforms can be enablement for CDNs to go to the edge and tap distributed form factor. But at the same time, it has to be open. You have to enable multiple CDNs to make use of that. You can't just say that you have one CDN deployed at the edge and will be ever suffice, because all the economics, all the different counter relations come into play. You have over-the-top CDN players that work with operators. You have operator CDN solutions out there. So there is a need to have multi-tenant platform to really enable that. And that's what we are pursuing.
Okay. Gilad?
So when we talk to operators, they want a solution. I agree they don't want a red box and a blue box, but sometimes I probably said something wrong.
Wow.
But anyway, they don't want a red box and a blue box, I agree. They want a solution. And realistically speaking, there's a timeline. And sometimes they don't have room for any box at all at the edge. Some cases they have, some cases they don't. They want a network-wide solution that can be deployed in a hierarchical manner, part of it at the core, part of it at the edge, really depending on the challenges that they have. So step number one is that you need an architecture that is, can cover all the different challenges of a large network. Step number two is that this architecture needs to be, in a way, as similar as possible to a CDN. Basically, when you want to integrate two different systems or two different solutions, it's better or it's easier when they both have a similar architecture. Step number three is that you need a proper interface. Now, what we've gone and done is come up with an API, an interface that will help us to integrate with different CDNs. Today, I don't know if you got a chance to see, we've announced our first partnership with a CDN provider called Jetstream. They're here at the show, so you can chat with them as well. And the interface is based on closely coupled, okay, I don't want to say it's following exactly, but it's closely coupled to the CDN interworking interface. And by the way, call for action to the ITF folks, add interface to transparent caching to this specification. It will serve the whole community, the whole market. So it's architecture and it's an open interface that will allow to do additional integration projects.
Okay. Any questions from the audience for the panel members? Yeah.
What's level 3's position?
No, this is the panel, not me. So the question was, what's level 3's position? I think, good question, and I actually asked to do this panel because we're still trying to figure out what we do. And I think many of the answers here underpin that there needs to be a more comprehensive architecture as the CDN infrastructure moves into all networks, into ISP networks in particular, partly because of the real estate issue, partly because of how you redirect traffic to devices, and the efficiency and usage of the compute facilities that you put there. So our view is that it comes together. we're not quite sure how yet, and we're not quite sure how the commercial models work.
And so would that be beefing up your infrastructure at the end, at the edge, or
It means an elegant combination of transparently caching content that you're not also being paid to deliver, if that makes sense, in terms of how the software works, in terms of how you consume the devices that are installed in other people's network. Any other questions? Yeah, sorry.
So the inline architecture model and the deployments that we have, what's the cacheability that you've seen? What amount of traffic do you see is cacheable? And what's the typical cache hit you've seen that the operators get?
Yeah, great question. So what's the typical cache efficiency? And I think we should hear from all of you on that. So could Hashim, if you want to start.
Right. So a lot of times, as soon as we go in, that's the very first question that is asked. We've seen anywhere, with the deployments where they are only interested in their own content. Obviously, the cacheability is huge, and we have capabilities of pushing the content to the devices that we put in place. So in those scenarios, the cacheability is obviously phenomenal. Now, beyond that, when we have everything, and you have to cache everything that is sent our way, we hear if we get above 25, 30%, then they are extremely happy. And that's the type of target that we're after. We want. Now, with the cache, obviously, it takes a while for that cache to get populated. So we've noticed that initial deployment, you go in and over time, your hit rates increase because of the amount of data that is in your cache.
So and by 25 to 30%, you mean 25 to 30% of all of the traffic that an individual end user is consuming comes off a transparent cache?
Exactly.
In an ISP.
Exactly.
And do you see that, Hashim?
Yeah, we've seen similar to what Hashim said. If you are passing the entire internet in that ISP through that system, you'd get around 25 to 30%. And majority of the benefits you get from, say, 10, 15 domains. And there may be thousands of domains, but the majority of the benefit comes from 10, 15 domains, which are mostly video domains. But if you use an ADC and you are just whitelisting the content, you know which domains have to go through this, then you are actually passing selected traffic to the system, and you can get a cache hit ratio of 50, 60% for that particular content.
25% is the cache hit ratio, but do you have any metrics on how much traffic is cacheable? Do you see that because the trend has gone the last 20 years from 70%, and I don't know what the number is right now. The internet traffic, the majority of the traffic marked as non-cacheable, or is it cacheable?
Majority of the video traffic is marked as cacheable. So quite a lot of video traffic is cacheable. It's the long tail of the content that causes the cache hit ratio to reduce, because there's just everybody's accessing different kinds of content. So it really, really depends on which service provider you're going into. So we have seen cache hit ratio of 50, 60% also. It depends on the kind of traffic. And as I mentioned, if you put something as whitelisting, you can really significantly improve the cache hit ratio of these solutions.
I'll let these two answer first, and then I'll go back to you. So, Alan?
So I think the first question about the what's cacheable, I think we're looking at over 50, 60% of the content is repeatable and cacheable. And I would like to emphasize it's not just video. There's a lot of perception about how caching or internet is all about video. It's a good marketing buzz. If you go to the field and deploy solutions, you find out there's a lot of software being moved around. And actually a narrow class of traffic like that, for example, Microsoft Windows updates, that service pack that you move on Tuesday, 95% cacheability, right? Because everybody's getting the same. And software is a big part of that. File sharing, that is not a video per se, but sort of is file sharing of cloud-based and peer-to-peer and HTTP is a big part of that. The social media is a large selection of traffic. Most of that is cacheable, and it's content that can be cached. There's certainly differences about how you go about that. I think all the vendors here will have different capabilities, what you can cache, so that will depend. In terms of efficiency, I agree with if you're looking at narrow domain, right, we can have very high hit ratio. So, if you just cache YouTube, for example, can be 70, 80%, right? Microsoft Windows Update, great stuff, right? 95. But that's the thing is, that conversation moves away from discussion about the benefit. Why would you have caching in your network? It wouldn't be just to cache that one domain of the day. It will be really to, you would deploy caching as an operator to offload your network in a way that you don't have to manage caching, right? That really the network is, the caching is self-learning, is detecting what's popular and offloading that on a broad basis. And that's how we take this. If you do that, so not only you have low cost of ownership around that, so you don't have to configure domains, URL, and all that stuff, but also you can, your network, you learn your network. Network is a living, breathing thing. Anybody who ever operated anything on the internet knows that today is not what it used to be tomorrow. You have spikes, you have Olympics, you have all kind of flash crowd events. So caching should float with that and adjust and detect that. And the way to do that is to look at the traffic broadly and to learn. Right? Maybe smart ways of doing that, but I think pre-selecting domains, we generally believe is not the best idea. You really need to look at the network as a whole. And as a result, I think transparent caching becomes part of your network infrastructure.
So Gilad, what sort of percentages are you using?
Yeah, so what I like to joke about in the company is that if I started up a caching company, I could do caching for sites like Microsoft Update and get 95, 100% hit ratio very easily because it's a few files and it's easy to cache. The question is, what sort of percentage? What is the hit ratio? What is the efficiency of the system on sort of infinite sites, infinite catalog sites like YouTube? That's one of the biggest sites, of course. We get 80%. We get 80% hit ratio, means 80% of the hits, 80% of the requests for content are coming from the cache. That means the operator can reduce the cost on 80%. That means the operator can do the monetization of quality of experience on 80%, and so on. And that's not unique. We can show statistics for all kinds of different sites. Of course, the smaller the site is, the higher the hit ratio is. There's another thing that's very important to realize, and again, it goes back to the architecture. In an out-of-band architecture, you don't need to run all the internet traffic through your system, which would be okay in small networks, but in networks which you have terabits of traffic, you don't want to run all of that traffic through the system. The idea of the out-of-band, in a kind of a similar way to CDN, it uses a request for content to analyze, what is the request, what is the content, and redirects the users to get the content off of a specific server. That's the idea of out-of-band.
Okay. Hashem, you wanted to add something else?
Yeah, another thing that's very important is also making sure that the transparent caching solution that you have in place has optimizations that can do better caching of things like YouTube, Facebook, Netflix, things like that. And then beyond that, you want to make sure that the cache that you have put in place can scale. Sooner or later, all of this depends on how much of your data is in the cache. And sooner or later, the amount of data that you have in the cache will consume all the disks that you have on that transparent cache. You have to have a technology that can easily scale to the next server that you put on the system, and you want to make sure that the content can be distributed on the new caches that you add to the service that you're providing.
This is a follow-up question. So the 25-30%, one other parameter that determines that is the user size, right? And as you move content more and more to the edge, you've got to deal with smaller and smaller number of users. So this can be answered by anyone. So when you say 25-30%, what kind of user size or the number of simultaneous active users, or whatever metric you want to use, is a requirement? Is it 10,000 subs or 100,000? What point below which you're not going to get this 20%?
So how far up do you aggregate a number of users is what you're asking? Yeah. Who wants to answer that?
I can start, or go ahead.
So we've seen benefit, same kind of benefit in 10,000 subs and millions of subs. So yeah, the content becomes more specific as you go in number of subs going down, but that means you're able to store their content from them. They maybe repeat amongst them also. So we see very similar return, and because the caching solutions are very scalable, you don't need to deploy a large-scale caching solution with lots of storage in smaller ISPs. You could deploy a smaller one. So the ROI is there. For smaller ISPs, the ROI is there because they are deploying a small solution, and their bandwidth cost may be much higher. So whatever benefit they get by 25 to 30% cache hit ratio for those subs itself, it actually serves the purpose.
I think there was another question at the back.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like one of the things that we're noticing is kind of going forward, SSL is playing a much bigger role in kind of the future of the internet. We see people deploying SSL in all kinds of ways when they're broad. Can you guys speak to kind of what that means for the future of transparent caching?
Yeah, good question. So how is SSL as a delivery protocol changing this, if anything? What's the comment?
I can respond to that. I think what you're seeing that SSL is being used for control plane. So you look at Facebook offering SSL connectivity. You have Google services starting to use that as an option. So you'll see more of a secure delivery of control data. If you look at large-scale content delivery, I think the economics plays against SSL. There's just no upside for delivering video over SSL and a lot of downside. In cost, in performance, and scalability is that I think every content provider that delivers content on a scale is racing to lower their cost structure, and SSL is not necessarily a good way to do that. So we see that HTTP delivery playing the role, absolutely, but it should be mostly around adaptive bitrate protocols and not necessarily over SSL.
So do any of you cache anything in relation to SSL? You could, but you'd be interfering with the encryption, right?
Right. So I actually have a patent that deals with all of that, where you can provide, you can cache secure sites. The main issue with secure sites is the certificates that's associated with that site. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a dedicated site and you want to cache that content, then you need the certificate that's associated with that site, and then very easily you can cache that content. But just like what Alan was saying, majority of the sites use SSL for authentication purposes. Once they have identified the user, it truly does not make any sense to use SSL. You want to make sure that you close the doors on users that don't have proper authorizations to access your content. But once they provide that, majority of the implementation, you look at Netflix, Facebook, things like that, YouTube, it's using HTTP, and transparent caching by its nature is mostly deployed to cache HTTP port 80, which is the default port for that, and that's that. But then as far as caching secure site, it is possible, but then you have to have the certificate.
Just Alan wanted to, Gilad wanted to comment on one of the other questions.
On the previous question, so caching is really about statistics, right? What is popular, and finding what is popular, it's easier when you have a bigger population. So what we find in our deployments is that the bigger population that we're serving, user base, we get better hit ratio. Now, caching servers, because you have this split architecture, the caching service could be deployed anywhere in the network. They could serve 1,000 subscribers, 10,000, or 100 subscribers. The control plane is the one that controls, right, all the decisions, all the logic. So the control plane is the one that sees all the requests, and we have networks with 500,000, 1 million, and several million subscribers. That's where we get the high hit ratio. So again, the caching servers, they're just doing the serving. The cache control, or the manager that we call, is the one that's taking the caching algorithm decisions. And the bigger the population is, the better the statistics and the better the hit ratio.
Did you want to add something on the SSO issue?
Yeah, I did. Actually, that's a very good point because that's where the convergence of reverse proxy caching and the transparent proxy caching comes in. If it is the same system and if you have to serve SSL traffic, it will require an agreement with a content provider because if you are going to serve it from the edge, you'll have to terminate the session, decrypt and encrypt it again. And if it is the same solution and you have the agreement of the content provider, you can offer that as a service too. So the benefit of converged offering is that you can separate the traffic and serve it differently as you wish.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Yeah, sort of as a follow-up, do you see the content owners that mark their content uncacheable using other methods to try to combat the transparent caching on the edge, such as tokenization, other types of ways to prevent you from transparently caching, and how do you deal with that?
So is cache busting on the increase? You want to start?
We've seen that, but I always like to ask why they're doing it. And I had this debate with one of my colleagues, and I don't get it really. Why do content providers have an issue with transparent caching? At the end of the day, think about it. If an operator deploys transparent caching, they're actually taking care that the end users of that content provider, of that site, will get a better quality of experience, and they're doing it for free, right? They're not asking anything from the content provider. So I don't get why they do it. I can tell you that in RFPs, operators are specifically requesting systems that can override, for instance, the HTTP do not cache, whatever. And there are different mechanisms to do that.
Anyone else got any comments on that?
Yeah, I'd like to add. So I don't see that as necessarily as cache busting. Some of that is actually a byproduct of something else. I think what you're seeing is the evolution of HTTP protocol as content providers, CDNs are tapping HTTP protocol as becoming sort of new TCP in a way, right? And to support authorization, for example, over SSL. So all the hashed URL setups. We're not necessarily designed to bust caching. Cache didn't exist. Transparent cache as a solution didn't exist for some time. I think that people stopped designing for transparent cache, or people used to have issues with older proxy implementations of caches. So that's why I think CDNs felt that they need to use no cache directive because some of those older solutions just didn't work well. That's one reason. Other is really just that authentication, authorization, the whole new thing, whole new world of internet videos that's being developed over HTTP, and that's not necessarily friendly to the cache as defined as HTTP RFC 2616, right? You have to, that's caching for URL is not necessarily a good way right now. As we're seeing up to 50% of all HTTP traffic being non-URL friendly. URL means anything but not an object. URL used to be universal resource locator, right? A way to identify an object, not anything, not anymore. You have SOAP or REST calls, you have tokens, you have all kind of stuff there. So what we are using is we're using object analysis to identify cacheability across broad selection of content applications. So we're able to work around that. And generally, I think that there's a way for two parties to cooperate. There is a way in business models that can be created to cooperate and make it make sense in terms of SLA, in terms of logic propagation, that make it a better world.
We agree.
That's good.
Yeah, I agree. I agreed here too because I don't see a reason why content providers would have any problem because they're saving money on the bandwidth, and their users are getting better experience. And some of the content providers that we worked with, they didn't even know that they had marked their content non-cacheable. It was part of their publishing process, and they had no idea. So not necessarily they're marking it because they want to, they just didn't know about it. And some may be marking it for mostly control plane reasons, but majority of the content that is marked uncacheable is either by mistake or they just didn't know?
Now, for whatever reason they're doing that, I think I do agree that it does not make sense. But for whatever reason they do that, you have to have an architecture in place that you can easily take care of situations like that. I'll give you an example. When you go to YouTube, for example, they have a private header, which means that the browser can cache the data, but the intermediate caches cannot cache the content. Now, obviously, if you are a transparent caching solution with that limitations in place, there is nothing that you can cache when it comes to YouTube. Now, you have to have a solution in place where things like that are identified. And I agree with Anshu. A lot of times, it's just maybe lack of understanding, lack of not knowing about transparent caches in place, that things like this happen. But your architecture needs to be able to handle situations like that.
So let's just do one quick question from over here.
Well, it's actually a follow-up on that conversation. I mean, sure, some content provider, they just want their content out there. If it could happen magically with, they would be very happy. But some, they just want to understand what happens. So they want their content to go somewhere. They'd like to know how many people got it, and they'd like to know who got it, actually, because they have to work into analytics and stuff. So can you comment on that? Because I think that's a good argument for why content providers may have a problem with completely transparent caching.
Sure. Yeah, good question. So the content owners may like it for free, but they want a whole bunch of stuff back for the experience of the customers, right? So we need 30 seconds each.
Cool. Okay. I'll be quick. Usually analytics go on a separate channel, so they're not basing their statistics on the actual delivery, but analytics are reported by the player on a separate channel, and transparent caching doesn't interfere with that. Short? Yeah.
Good.
Transparency is important. Solutions should allow the CDNs and content providers have visibility into the demand. That's why our solution is transparent to the server, and there's a lot of aspects that are important. We talk about different architectures. That's one important difference, how transparent you are to the content.
One of the requirements of DMCA is that the hit is reported to the origin site. So the content provider does get the acknowledgement that somebody viewed their content. I mean, the player tells who it was. So.
Well,
okay.
On the other hand, though, when you have the transparent caching in place, there are other means of, the content providers can definitely get the information that they're after. Now, there's different ways of going about that without worrying about the transparent caches in place. One of the things that we've seen a lot of times, for example, is that the content providers want to know who it is that's going after their content. And very easily with transparent caching, you can enable things like IP spoofing and provide all of that information back to the destination web server, for example. They know, instead of knowing that all the requests are coming from this transparent cache, they're actually getting the IP address of the browser, for the lack of a better term, going all the way there. And then there are cookies and different means that they can get the data that they're after.
All right, we've run out of time, folks.